The sky was a canvas of muted grays, the kind of dull, lifeless color that mirrored the weight pressing against my chest. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and wilting flowers, a cruel reminder of the finality of this moment. My daughter's coffin, small and far too delicate for such a cruel world, rested beside an open grave. A black-clad priest murmured solemn words about eternal rest and divine comfort, but I barely heard him. I stood motionless, my fingers clutching the edges of my coat as if holding on to something, anything, to keep from shattering. My little girl, my Grace, was gone, and with her, the last piece of light in my world had been extinguished. People surrounded me, offering condolences in hushed tones, but their voices blurred into meaningless whispers. Their hands touched my shoulders, my back, my arms, but none of them could penetrate the hollow emptiness that had taken root inside me. Yet, through the fog of grief, I noticed one thing above all else. The empty space beside me. Daniel wasn't there. My husband, the man who had vowed to stand beside me through sickness and sorrow, was missing. A fresh wave of agony rippled through my chest, anger and heartbreak twisting together like a serrated blade. He hadn't even shown up to bury his own daughter. I exhaled sharply, my breath clouding in the cold air as I fumbled for my phone, hands shaking. Maybe he was late. Maybe he had an excuse, car trouble, a last-minute work emergency. Anything. But when I pulled my phone from my pocket, my blood turned to ice. A message. Daniel, important meeting. I'll call you later. I stared at the words, blinking, hoping I had read them wrong. A meeting? While I stood over the grave of our only child, while I mourned the daughter we had once created together, he had been too busy for this. But it wasn't just the message that made my breath catch in my throat. It was the small detail beneath it, the location tag. Not from an office, not from a boardroom or a conference hall, but from a luxury beach resort. My vision blurred, not with tears this time, but with a burning, seething rage so potent I could taste it. My stomach twisted, my fingers tightening around my phone as the reality of it crashed over me. He wasn't grieving. He wasn't mourning. He was drinking mojitos by the pool while I stood at our daughter's grave. I felt my knees weaken, but I locked them in place. I wouldn't collapse. Not here. Not now. The priest's voice faded as the last shovelful of dirt was laid over Grace's grave. The finality of it should have shattered me completely, but instead, something else was stirring beneath the grief. A spark of something raw and ugly. Not sorrow. Not despair. Anger. White-hot, unrelenting rage. As the guests began to trickle away, offering me last words of sympathy, I simply nodded, my body moving on autopilot. But my mind was already somewhere else. With every step toward my car, my heartbeat pounded like a war drum in my ears. My breath came in sharp, shallow bursts as I gripped the steering wheel, staring down at that damning text message. Daniel had abandoned us long before today. I just hadn't realized it until now. I had begged him to come home early from his endless business trips, pleaded with him to be there for Grace's last moments. But every time he had fed me the same lines. I'm doing this for us, Evelyn. I'll make it up to her. I promise. Lies. Every single word had been a lie. And now, as I sat in my car, my fingers trembling around my phone, I realized something else. Daniel thought he had won. He thought he had escaped the consequences of his selfishness, that he could slip away into his perfect little fantasy life while I withered away in grief. But he was wrong. Dead wrong. Because if he thought I would let him walk away from this unscathed, if he thought he could erase Grace and me from his life without consequences, then he was about to learn just how wrong he really was. The drive home was a blur. The world outside my window a smudge of gray and rain-streaked glass. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached, but I barely noticed. The only thing I could see, over and over again, was that message. Important meeting. Luxury resort. It played in my mind like a taunt, like a cruel joke told at the worst possible moment. Daniel hadn't just abandoned me today. He had abandoned us long before. I had spent months by Grace's bedside, watching her slip away inch by inch. I had held her through the worst of it, through the nights where she whimpered in pain, too weak to even cry. I had whispered promises I wasn't sure I believed, telling her she'd be okay, that she was loved, that her daddy would be home soon. Lies. Lies I had unknowingly fed my dying daughter, while the man who should have been there was drinking champagne under the sun. A sharp pain clenched my chest, but it wasn't grief this time. It was something darker, something cold and unyielding. Couldn't let this go. The moment I stepped through the front door, the house felt unbearably empty. Grace's absence was everywhere. Her little shoes still sat by the entrance. Her favorite blanket was draped over the couch, untouched, as if she might run back in at any moment and wrap herself in it. She never would. I closed my eyes, inhaling deeply. The scent of her still lingered. Lavender and baby shampoo. The soft powdery smell that would fade with time, no matter how much I willed it to stay. But as much as the grief threatened to consume me, it wasn't enough to stop the storm brewing inside. Daniel had been distant for months, but I had chalked it up to stress. Work, financial pressures, the weight of having a terminally ill child. I had been too preoccupied with keeping Grace alive to question the late-night meetings, the unexplained absences, the tension that crept into our marriage like a slow poison. Now I saw it for what it really was. He had already left us. He had just been too much of a coward to say it out loud. I walked straight to the kitchen, grabbing my laptop with trembling hands. If Daniel thought I was too weak, too broken to fight back, he was about to learn how wrong he was. My fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up our shared bank account. The numbers stared back at me, and my stomach lurched. Thousands, tens of thousands, had disappeared in the past 6 months. I clicked through the transactions, my pulse hammering in my ears. 5-star resorts, high-end restaurants, jewelry stores I had never set foot in. Daniel hadn't just been on vacation. He had been living another life. I exhaled sharply, forcing myself to focus. There had to be more. Social media, his emails, anything that would confirm what I already knew in my gut. It didn't take long. Her name was Lily. She was tagged in nearly every photo, her face glowing with happiness as she posed by infinity pools and luxury suites. In one image, Daniel was standing behind her, his arms wrapped around her waist, a glass of champagne in one hand. His smile was wide, relaxed, the same smile he used to give me. My vision blurred. I slammed the laptop shut, breathing hard, nausea rolling through me. He wasn't just cheating. He had replaced me. While I had been drowning in hospital corridors, pleading with doctors, praying for miracles, Daniel had been playing house with someone else. I stood abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor. I needed air. The rain had started again, drumming against the windows in a steady rhythm. I walked to the front door, pressing my palm against the cool wood, grounding myself. Couldn't fall apart. Not yet. Because if I let myself crumble under the weight of this, I wasn't sure I'd ever get back up. And I had something to do first, before I share what happened next. The moment that left an entire room of journalists in stunned silence. I want to connect with you, my amazing viewers. Where are you watching from? Drop your country's flag in the comments below. And if you've ever had to fight for something you believe in, hit that like button, because this story is just getting started. I pulled my phone from my pocket, my fingers hovering over Daniel's name. For a fleeting second, I considered calling him, demanding answers, screaming every ounce of rage and betrayal into his ear. But no, that wasn't good enough. Daniel had spent months keeping me in the dark. It was my turn to hold the cards. I wasn't going to give him the chance to lie his way out of this. I was going to make sure he lost everything. I just needed proof. And I knew exactly how to get it. The rain had stopped by the time I stepped back inside, but the storm inside me raged on. Every breath felt heavy, my chest tight with the weight of betrayal. My fingers trembled as I reached for my laptop again, my mind sharp with purpose. Daniel had stolen so much from me, from us, but I wouldn't let him take anything else. I had given him trust, loyalty, and forgiveness when he didn't deserve it. I had spent sleepless nights by Grace's hospital bed, whispering reassurances, while he had been whispering sweet nothings into another woman's ear. And the worst part? I had never questioned it. I had believed every excuse, every lie, because I needed to believe the man I married wasn't capable of this. But now I saw the truth, and I wasn't going to be silent anymore. I opened his email first, my heart pounding as I typed in his password. It wasn't hard to guess. Daniel had always been arrogant enough to believe no one would ever check. The inbox loaded, and within seconds, I felt my stomach drop. There they were. Dozens of emails from Lily. I clicked the most recent one, my pulse hammering. Baby, I can't wait to see you again. The Maldives were amazing, but I think our next trip should be even bigger. Italy, maybe? We deserve it. Can't wait to feel your arms around me again. Love you. Red heart. I swallowed hard, nausea curling in my gut. But I kept reading. I know things are complicated, but she'll never find out. Just give it a little more time. Once everything is finalized, we can finally be together without sneaking around. Finalized? A chill ran through me. He wasn't just cheating. He was planning to leave me, and he hadn't even had the decency to tell me to my face. I forced myself to breathe, my hands clenching into fists. The betrayal was overwhelming, but I couldn't afford to break down. Not yet. I needed more. Switching tabs, I pulled up our shared bank account again, cross-referencing the transactions I had seen earlier. My eyes scanned the withdrawals, the payments, the increasing expenses over the past year. It didn't take long to see the pattern. Daniel had been funding his new life with Lily using our money. Thousands of dollars were missing, disguised under vague labels like business expenses and client entertainment. But the receipts told a different story. 5-star hotels, spa treatments, high-end jewelry stores. He hadn't just been careless. He had been deliberate. Every stolen dollar had been a choice. Every missing night had been a lie. And every second I had spent thinking he was too busy working to be home with us, he had been with her. My fingers tightened around the edges of the laptop as I leaned back, exhaling slowly. This wasn't just infidelity. This was theft, and I could destroy him with it. But first, I needed help. I grabbed my phone and scrolled through my contacts. There was only one person I could think of. Someone who wouldn't just listen, but who would find the truth buried beneath every lie Daniel had ever told. I dialed the number, pressing the phone to my ear. A woman's voice answered on the second ring, sharp and professional. This is Eleanor. I had never hired a private investigator before, but in that moment, I knew I had made the right choice. Eleanor, I need your help, I said, keeping my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. There was a pause. Then, tell me everything. And I did. I told her about the text, about the money, about Lily, about every broken promise and every stolen moment. By the time I was done, my breath was uneven, but Eleanor's voice was calm, steady. I can find everything you need, she said. Bank statements, travel records, any hidden assets. If he's been careful, I'll find out just how careful. And if he hasn't, you'll have enough to bury him. Her words sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. I don't just want proof of the affair, I murmured, my grip tightening around the phone. I want to know everything. There was another pause. Then, Eleanor spoke again. Consider it done. The call ended, and I sat there for a moment, staring at my reflection in the dark screen of my laptop. I didn't recognize the woman looking back at me. Gone was the grieving widow, the woman too shattered to fight. In her place was someone different, someone colder, someone ready for war. Over the next few days, Eleanor worked fast. Every evening, she sent me updates, each one worse than the last. Daniel wasn't just cheating. He wasn't just stealing. He had been embezzling from his own company. According to Eleanor's findings, he had been siphoning funds for months, covering his tracks with false invoices and fake expenses. It was a house of cards waiting to collapse. But the worst part? Lily knew. In one of the emails Eleanor uncovered, Lily had encouraged him to take more money, saying he should put himself first for once. I nearly laughed when I read that. Put himself first? That's all Daniel had ever done. But he had underestimated me, because now I had everything I needed. The money, the lies, the mistress, the fraud. And I was going to use it all. I spent the next night preparing. I printed every document, every email, every bank statement Eleanor had found. I compiled screenshots of Daniel and Lily's exchanges. I saved photos of them together, time-stamped proof of every betrayal. By the time I was finished, a thick folder sat in front of me. Daniel had built his life on lies, and I was about to tear it all down. The next morning, I made 2 phone calls. The first was to Daniel's company. The second, to a lawyer. I wasn't just going to expose him. I was going to annihilate him. Daniel had thought he was safe. He thought I would be too broken to fight back. But he had no idea who he was dealing with. And by the time I was finished, he wouldn't have anything left. The morning air was crisp, the kind that carried a quiet stillness before a storm. I sat at the dining table, staring at the thick folder of evidence in front of me. Every page was a dagger. Every receipt, every email, every transaction was proof of Daniel's betrayal. I had spent the last 3 days preparing, printing documents, saving screenshots, and compiling everything into an airtight case. I had enough to dismantle his career, his reputation, and his personal life in one calculated move. But I wasn't just going to expose him. I was going to watch him crumble. I exhaled slowly, my fingers grazing the edge of my phone. The message I was about to send would set everything in motion. I typed carefully, deliberately. I've been thinking about us. I know things have been difficult, but I don't want to throw everything away. Can we talk? I paused, letting the words settle on the screen. Then I added the final bait. Let's meet at the beach house this weekend. Just us. No distractions. I hit send and waited. Seconds later, my phone vibrated. Daniel, of course. I'd love that. I almost laughed. He thought he had won. He thought he was still in control. But he had no idea that this weekend wouldn't be a reconciliation. It would be his reckoning. The drive to the beach house felt surreal. The ocean stretched endlessly to my right, its calm surface a stark contrast to the storm inside me. The house itself loomed ahead, unchanged from the last time we had been there as a family. Back then, it had been a sanctuary. Now it was a stage. I pulled into the driveway, stepping out and inhaling the salty air. The weight of what I was about to do settled over me, but I didn't falter. I moved with precision, placing the folder of evidence on the dining table. I spread out the documents like pieces of a puzzle: bank statements, travel receipts, printed emails. Then, I turned on the TV and loaded the final piece. A video montage of Grace. Her laughter, her birthday, her tiny voice singing off-key in the back seat of the car. Daniel had spent the last year running from his past. I was about to make him face it. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat at the kitchen island, waiting. Minutes ticked by. Then, tires crunched on the gravel driveway. He was here. The door swung open, and there he was. Daniel strode in casually, carrying an overnight bag. He wore a linen shirt, the sleeves rolled up just enough to make him look effortlessly relaxed. The kind of man who had no idea his world was about to burn. "Hey," he said, flashing a smile. "You look good." I returned his smile, but it never reached my eyes. "Thanks," I said, voice even. "I thought we needed to talk." He set his bag down, stepping toward me. "I think so too. I know things have been hard, but I really want to fix this." I tilted my head, watching him carefully. "You do. Of course." His voice was smooth, practiced. "I love you, Evelyn. I never wanted us to be like this. Lies. All of it." But I let him speak. Let him weave his false sincerity like a spider spinning a fragile web. Because soon it would all come crashing down. I gestured to the dining table. "Before we talk about us, I want to show you something." His brow furrowed, but he followed me. The moment he saw the documents, his body tensed. He picked up one of the bank statements, his jaw tightening. "What is this?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. I crossed my arms. "You tell me." His eyes flickered across the page, scanning the numbers. "These are just expenses," he said smoothly. "You know how work is. Entertaining clients, travel." I reached for another paper, this one a receipt for a luxury suite in the Maldives. dated the same week Grace had been in the hospital. I placed it in front of him. He didn't move. His Adam's apple bobbed. Evelyn, I didn't let him finish. I walked to the living room and grabbed the remote. Then I pressed play. The screen flickered, and suddenly, Grace was there. Her tiny hands clapped together as she blew out birthday candles. Her voice filled the room, pure, joyful, untouched by the pain that had come after. Daniel inhaled sharply. His fingers clenched into fists. What is this? His voice was barely above a whisper. I turned to him, my heart pounding. This, I said, my voice trembling with controlled fury, is what you missed while you were off with her. He didn't answer. He couldn't. The weight of it was suffocating. But I wasn't done. I picked up the final piece, a printed email from Lily. Once everything is finalized, we'll never have to look back. She'll never see it coming. I slammed it onto the table in front of him. Were you even going to say goodbye? I demanded, my voice breaking. Or were you just going to disappear, leaving me to pick up the pieces while you played house with her? His face drained of color. Evelyn, please. I shook my head, stepping back. No, no more lies. No more excuses. Silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. Then Daniel's mask slipped. His expression hardened. His shoulders squared. So what now? He asked, his voice cold. You wanted me here just to humiliate me? I met his gaze, unwavering. No, I said softly. I wanted you here to watch you lose everything. And with that I walked away. Because this wasn't just about revenge. This was about justice. For Grace. For me. For every moment he had stolen. And by the time I was done, Daniel would have nothing left. The room fell into a suffocating silence. Daniel's shoulders tensed, his fingers twitching at his sides. His once practiced charm had shattered into something colder, something unrecognizable. Gone was the man who used to whisper promises into my ear, the man who had once held our daughter in his arms with something that looked like love. Now, standing before me was a stranger. His voice, when he finally spoke, was sharp, controlled, calculated. What do you want, Evelyn? I stared at him, my heart pounding, but my face remained unreadable. He was looking for an angle, a way to maneuver his way out of this. He had spent years perfecting the art of deception, thinking he could lie and manipulate his way through life. But I wasn't the same woman he had married, and he had just run out of exits. I don't want anything, I said, my voice steady. I just wanted you to see, to look at her face one last time and realize that while you were drinking champagne with your mistress, your daughter was taking her last breath without you. His jaw tightened. That's not fair. No, I let out a hollow laugh. Which part? The fact that you were gone? The fact that you were lying while I sat in a hospital room alone? Or the part where you stole from your own family to fund your new life? He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. Evelyn, you're angry. I get that. You don't get anything. I stepped closer, each word pressing against the space between us like a blade. You don't get to play the victim when you abandoned us. You don't get to act like this was some mistake when you deliberately stole from us, cheated on me, and left your own daughter to die without even saying goodbye. His hands clenched into fists. His mask of control was slipping. I didn't know it would happen that fast, he muttered. The words hit me like a slap. I swallowed the lump in my throat, blinking against the sudden burn of tears. You didn't know? My voice wavered. She was dying, Daniel. I told you. The doctors told you. She asked for you. And you still chose her. I didn't have to say Lily's name. It sat unspoken between us, heavy with disgust. Daniel exhaled through his nose, shaking his head. You don't understand. No, I took another step forward. You don't understand. I grabbed the folder of evidence and shoved it against his chest. These are copies of every fraudulent transaction, every stolen dollar, every trip, every lie, every moment you spent pretending to be a family man while you were running off with her. His eyes flicked down to the papers in his hands, scanning them quickly. I saw the exact moment it hit him. His face went pale. You wouldn't, he said, voice lower now. I tilted my head. Wouldn't I? A flicker of fear crossed his face, but he masked it quickly. Evelyn, listen to me. No, you listen. I stepped forward again, my voice steel. I already sent copies of this to your company's board of directors. You know, the people who trusted you not to embezzle from them. You're going to lose your job, your career, your reputation. His breathing quickened. You don't know what you've done. I ignored him. I also sent copies to our lawyer. Divorce papers will be ready soon. I folded my arms. I'd start thinking about what you're going to say to your mistress, because you won't have our money to fund her vacations anymore. His nostrils flared. You're ruining my life. I laughed. Actually laughed. At the audacity of it. Your life. I gestured to the screen where Grace's smiling face was still frozen. You ruined ours. This is just you finally facing the consequences. He shook his head, stepping back. His mind was racing, trying to find a way out, a way to spin this. Evelyn, we can fix this. His voice softened, shifting into a version of the man I used to know. I know I made mistakes, but we don't have to do this. We can figure it out. I narrowed my eyes. You're not sorry for what you did. My voice was quieter now, calmer. You're just sorry you got caught. His throat bobbed. He didn't deny it. I turned away, walking toward the front door. I want you gone by morning. Evelyn. I stopped, glancing over my shoulder. There's nothing left to say, I said. I gave you 1,000 chances to do the right thing, and you wasted every single one. He didn't follow me. He didn't argue. For the first time, Daniel had no words. And as I walked out of the house, the weight on my chest didn't feel so heavy anymore. Because this wasn't just about hurting him. This was about taking my life back. And I wasn't done yet. I didn't look back as I walked away from the beach house. The wind howled through the cliffs, salt clinging to my skin as if the ocean itself knew what had just happened inside those walls. The storm inside me hadn't settled, but for the first time in a long time, I felt lighter. I had spent months suffocating under the weight of grief, betrayal, and unanswered questions. But now Daniel had all the answers he never wanted to face. And the worst was yet to come. The next morning, I woke up to chaos. My phone buzzed relentlessly. Texts, missed calls, unread emails. The ripple effect of what I had done was already spreading, pulling Daniel into a current he couldn't escape. I scrolled through the messages, my heartbeat steady. Company board meeting urgent. Daniel Whitmore has been placed on immediate suspension pending investigation into financial discrepancies. Internal memo. Due to recent evidence of embezzlement, we are launching a full audit. Further legal action is being considered. I leaned back, exhaling slowly. It had begun. The company Daniel had built his entire identity around had turned on him overnight. I flipped to another email, this one from a former colleague of his. Evelyn, I don't know what's happening, but Daniel just got escorted out of the building by security. People are saying he's going to be indicted. Thought you should know. A small, satisfied hum slipped from my lips. Daniel had always walked through life believing he was untouchable. Now he was crumbling. I glanced at my phone again. More notifications. This time, social media. His downfall was no longer confined to boardrooms and private meetings. The public was starting to see him for what he really was. I tapped open a post, my eyes scanning the comments beneath a newly leaked news article. Headline: High-profile executive accused of embezzlement, financial misconduct under investigation. Top comment: Wait, wasn't his wife the one who just lost their daughter? And he was stealing money to fund vacations with his mistress? Reply: Holy SHT. What kind of monster does that? Asterisk. Reply: The audacity of this man. I hope he loses everything. The internet had taken its stance. Daniel wasn't just falling. He was being erased. But my phone wasn't just lighting up with news updates. Daniel was calling me. I stared at his name flashing on the screen. It was almost pathetic. I let the phone ring. Once, twice. Then I hit decline. If he had anything to say to me, he could say it from behind bars. because he was only just beginning to understand what he had lost. And by the time the dust settled, he would have nothing left. The letter arrived on a cold morning, buried under a pile of bills and advertisements I nearly tossed aside. It wasn't until I saw my name, scrawled in a familiar, almost frantic handwriting, that my breath caught in my throat. Daniel. For a moment, I just stared at the envelope, my pulse steady but unyielding. It had been weeks since he had last tried to call me, weeks since I had heard his voice begging for a chance to explain, to justify, to plead for something that could never be salvaged. I thought I had shut that door forever. And yet, here it was, a single letter. I debated throwing it away unread. But some part of me, maybe the part that had spent too many nights wondering how he had become this person, needed to know. With careful fingers, I tore open the envelope and unfolded the paper inside. His words, shaky and uneven, stared back at me. Evelyn, I don't know if you'll ever read this. Maybe you'll burn it before even opening it. Maybe you'll tear it apart the way I tore apart everything we built. I wouldn't blame you, but if you are reading, then please just listen. Just this once. I inhaled slowly, pressing my thumb against the edge of the paper. He didn't deserve for me to listen, but still I read on. You were right about everything. Every lie, every betrayal, every selfish decision. I did it all. And I justified it to myself in 1,000 ways, all of them weak, all of them pathetic. I thought I was running toward happiness, but all I did was run from the only real thing I ever had. I destroyed us. I know that now, but there's something I never told you. Something I should have, even if it doesn't change anything now. I swallowed hard, gripping the letter tighter. What else could there possibly be? The night Grace died, I wasn't just on a plane. I wasn't just avoiding the inevitable. I was running from something I was too much of a coward to face. A week before she passed, her doctor called me. He told me about an experimental treatment. A last chance. A desperate one. It wasn't a guarantee, but it was something. And I said no. The world tilted. My eyes froze on those words, my mind refusing to process them. I said no. The room around me felt too small, too suffocating. I gripped the letter harder, my knuckles white. I told myself it was because I didn't want to give you false hope, that I was protecting you from the pain of another failed treatment. But the truth is, Evelyn, I was afraid. The paper trembled in my hands. I was afraid of watching her suffer even more. I was afraid of losing, of knowing I had done everything and still failed. I chose my own fear over our daughter's life, and I've lived with that every day since. My breath came in shallow gasps, but I kept reading. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't deserve that. But I needed you to know. I needed you to know that I wasn't just a liar, a cheat, a thief. I was worse. I was a coward. And that's something I will never outrun. I hope, in whatever life you build after this, you find happiness again. Because I never will. Daniel. The letter slipped from my fingers, fluttering onto the table. I sat there, staring at it, at the black ink smudged in places where his hand had shaken. He had known. All this time, while I had grieved, while I had blamed myself for not doing more, for not finding another way, he had known. And he had said no. I felt something sharp crack open inside me, something I wasn't sure I could ever name. Not anger, not sorrow, not relief, something worse. Because for the first time, I didn't just hate Daniel. Pitied him. He had spent his life running, from his responsibilities, from his guilt, from the wreckage he left behind. And now he was rotting in it, alone. I picked up the letter again, staring at his name at the bottom. For so long, I had wanted him to suffer, to lose everything, to feel the weight of what he had done. And now I realized he already had. I stood slowly, walking to the fireplace. The flames crackled softly as I held the letter above them, watching as the edges curled, darkened, turned to ash. Somewhere in another life, another version of me might have held onto it. But I wasn't that woman anymore. I let go, and I watched Daniel Whitmore burn. The fire crackled softly, turning Daniel's final confession into ash. I watched the flames consume his words, feeling no sadness, no regret, only a quiet, hollow relief. For the first time in what felt like forever, I was done. Not just with him, not just with the lies, but with the weight of it all. I stepped back from the fireplace, inhaling deeply. The air smelled of burnt paper and closure. I hadn't thought it would feel this way, hadn't expected the final act of letting go to be so silent. No grand moment of triumph, no overwhelming wave of emotion, just stillness. I turned away, glancing at the framed photo of Grace on the mantel. She was frozen in time, laughing, eyes bright with a light that had never dimmed in my memory. She had deserved more. More than Daniel. More than the life she had been given. And if there was anything I could do to honor her, it was this. I would stop looking back. I would build something new. Something that would outlive the pain, the betrayal, even the grief itself. Something for her. The first step was letting go of the house. It had once been a home, filled with laughter and warmth. But now, it was a monument to everything I had lost. Packing wasn't easy. Every room carried memories. Some beautiful, some unbearable. I took my time, allowing myself to feel each one before boxing it away. Grace's room was the hardest. Her toys were still neatly arranged. Her books stacked on the nightstand just as she had left them. Her favorite stuffed bunny sat on her bed, its fur slightly worn from all the nights she had held it close. I picked it up, running my fingers over the soft fabric. This I kept, not out of grief but out of love. A reminder that she had been here, that she had been real. I donated most of her things to a children's hospital, knowing she would have wanted them to go to someone who needed them. The rest I carefully packed away, not to be forgotten, but to be carried forward. When the house was finally empty, I stood in the doorway for a long moment, staring at the hollow space that had once held a life I thought would last forever. Then, with a deep breath, I walked away. Moving to a new apartment was a strange kind of rebirth. It was smaller, quieter, free from the ghosts of the past. Sunlight streamed through the large windows in the mornings, warming the hardwood floors. It wasn't extravagant, but it was mine. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't living in the shadows of what had been. I was building something new, and at the center of it all was Grace. I had spent months drowning in grief, in rage, in the wreckage Daniel had left behind. But now I was ready to do something for her. The idea had been forming in the back of my mind since the day she died, but I had been too consumed by everything else to act on it. Now I had no more excuses, so I sat at my desk, opened a new document, and began typing. The Grace Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to helping families with terminally ill children, offering financial aid, emotional support, and resources that I wish I had had when I was fighting for Grace. The work consumed me in the best way. I reached out to hospitals, to community leaders, to families who had walked the same road I had. I told them Grace's story, not just the tragedy of it, but the light she had carried despite it all. The response was overwhelming. People listened, people cared, and slowly something began to grow. What started as a single initiative became a movement. Donations poured in. Volunteers stepped forward. Families began to reach out, sharing their own stories, their own heartbreaks, their own hopes. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving. I was building something that mattered, something that would make sure Grace was never forgotten. 1 year later, I stood in front of a crowd, microphone in hand, staring out at everything we had built. The Grace Foundation had grown beyond anything I had imagined. The event hall was filled with families, doctors, supporters, all gathered for our first major fundraiser. Behind me, a massive screen displayed a slideshow of the children we had helped, the ones still fighting, the ones who had found hope, and the ones we had lost. Grace's face appeared on the screen, and for the first time, I didn't feel the familiar ache of grief. I felt pride. I smiled softly, bringing the microphone to my lips. When I lost my daughter, I thought the world had ended. I said, my voice steady. But what I didn't realize was that her story wasn't over, because love like hers doesn't just disappear. It grows. I looked around the room, at the families who had found hope through Grace's name. She is still here, I continued. In every life we change, in every child we help, in every moment of kindness that reminds us that we are not alone. Grace didn't just live. She left a legacy. A hush fell over the crowd. And then applause. A thunderous, overwhelming wave of applause. Tears burned at the edges of my eyes, but they weren't from pain. They were from gratitude, because Grace's story hadn't ended. It had only just begun. Later that evening, after the event had wrapped up, I found myself at the new playground we had built in Grace's honor. The swings creaked gently in the breeze, the laughter of children filling the night air. A small plaque near the entrance bore her name. In loving memory of Grace Whitmore, a light that shines forever. I ran my fingers over the inscription, exhaling softly. You'd love this, baby? I whispered, closing my eyes. All of it. A gentle breeze brushed against my skin, carrying the faint scent of lavender. Her favorite. I smiled, because in that moment I knew she was here. She had never really left, and she never would. 3 weeks after the Grace Foundation's charity event, life had started to feel stable. My new apartment was warm and peaceful. My days were filled with purpose, helping families who were walking the same painful road I had once traveled. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was living instead of just surviving. But peace never lasts forever. One morning, as I walked into my office at the foundation, my assistant, Maggie, handed me a large white envelope. "This came in today," she said, looking hesitant. It wasn't sent through normal mail. It was hand-delivered. That made me pause. "From who?" Maggie shook her head. "No return address. Just your name on the front." A chill ran down my spine. I wasn't sure why, but something about it felt wrong. I took the envelope to my office, closing the door behind me. With careful fingers, I tore it open and pulled out the papers inside. The first thing I saw was a photo, one that made my stomach drop. It was a picture of Daniel, but not in prison. No handcuffs, no orange jumpsuit. He was sitting in what looked like a hotel lobby, a drink in hand, wearing a smug smile. The date on the corner of the photo was yesterday. My hands trembled as I flipped to the next page. A letter, typed, anonymous. "Evelyn, you thought it was over. You thought he was rotting away. But Daniel isn't in prison anymore. And he's not done with you. Be careful. He has nothing left to lose. A friend." I read it again, then again. The words swam in my vision, my breath coming in short gasps. Daniel wasn't in prison? I grabbed my phone, my fingers unsteady as I searched for any news articles. Nothing. The last reports still showed his trial, his sentencing, but no release. I slammed the letter down, my mind racing. Who had sent this? And more importantly, what was Daniel planning? That night, sleep didn't come. I lay awake in the dark, my thoughts tangled in fear and anger. Daniel had already taken everything from me once. I wouldn't let him do it again. By morning, I had made a decision. I needed to find him before he found me. I picked up my phone and dialed the only person I trusted to uncover the truth. Eleanor. The private investigator answered after one ring. "I was wondering when you'd call me again." I didn't waste time. "Daniel isn't in prison." A brief silence. Then, "That's impossible." "No, it's not," I said, my voice firm. "Someone sent me proof. A picture of him taken yesterday." Eleanor inhaled sharply. "Send it to me. I'll start digging." I ended the call and forwarded the letter and photo immediately. Minutes later, my phone buzzed. "Eleanor, meet me in an hour." My office. I threw on my coat and rushed out the door. Eleanor's office was tucked away in a small building downtown, a place where secrets were uncovered but never spoken aloud. When I arrived, she was already waiting, a thick file open in front of her. She gestured for me to sit. "You were right," she said without preamble. "Daniel isn't in prison." A lump formed in my throat. "How?" She flipped a page in the file, revealing a release order stamped with an official seal. 2 weeks ago, his conviction was overturned due to lack of solid evidence. His lawyers argued that the financial records used to convict him were obtained improperly. I gritted my teeth. That's bullshit. Eleanor nodded. It is. But the legal system isn't perfect. And now Daniel is free. My stomach churned. Where is he? She hesitated. That's the problem. I sat up straighter. What do you mean? He's off the grid, she admitted. No official addresses, no bank activity under his name. Whoever took that photo of him yesterday is watching him closer than I can. That made me pause. Who was watching Daniel? And why did they send the letter to me? That night, after returning to my apartment, my phone rang. An unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. Evelyn, a deep voice said. You don't know me, but I know Daniel, and I know what he's planning. My blood turned to ice. Who are you? A pause. Then, someone who wants to make sure you're not his next target. I gripped the phone tighter. Tell me what you know. A low sigh. Daniel blames you for everything. The money, the trial, his downfall. He wants revenge. I swallowed hard. How do you know this? Because I work for the people who used to clean up his messes. I went still. Daniel had always gotten away with everything. Because he had people covering for him, hiding his affairs, falsifying reports, burying problems before they ever reached the surface. And now one of them was calling me. What does he want? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Another pause. To take everything away from you, the way you took everything from him. The words settled like lead in my chest. My foundation, my home, my life. Daniel wasn't going to beg for redemption. He was going to burn everything down. And this time he wouldn't hesitate. I ended the call, my heart pounding. For so long, I had thought my battle with Daniel was over. That the war had been won. I had been wrong. This wasn't over. Not yet. But I wasn't the same woman he had betrayed. And if he thought he could destroy me, he was about to learn just how wrong he was. I picked up my phone and called Eleanor. We need to find him. She didn't hesitate. Then let's get started. Because if Daniel was coming for me, I was going to end this first. For Grace. For me. For everything he stole. And this time there would be no mercy. I didn't sleep that night. The weight of the phone call, the letter, and Daniel's impending return sat in my chest like a loaded gun. For months, I had believed I had won. That Daniel was locked away, his crimes exposed, his life ruined. Now he was out, and he was coming for me. But I wasn't going to wait for him to strike first. I had spent enough of my life reacting to Daniel's actions. This time, I would be the one pulling the strings. So, as the sun rose, I grabbed my phone and called Eleanor. We need to find him, I said the moment she answered. She didn't even hesitate. Already on it. She had always been efficient, but this time it was personal. I'll call you back when I have something, she promised. I hung up and exhaled slowly. This was it. The final battle. And I was ready. By midday, Eleanor sent me a location. A small town on the coast. Secluded. Quiet. The perfect place for a man trying to disappear. Daniel had always been predictable. He liked luxury, comfort, control. He wasn't the kind of man who could survive in hiding for long. And that meant he'd slip up eventually. I packed a bag and booked a last-minute flight. Maggie, my assistant at the Grace Foundation, looked at me with concern when I told her I'd be gone for a few days. Is everything okay? She asked. I forced a reassuring smile. Just a personal matter. It wasn't a lie. But it wasn't the whole truth either. Because if this went the way I thought it would, I wouldn't be coming back until Daniel Whitmore was finally buried. One way or another. The coastal town was eerily quiet. Eleanor had given me an address. A small rundown in near the pier. Daniel was there. I could feel it. I parked down the street, taking a deep breath as I reached for my phone. Eleanor, wait for my signal before you go in. I gritted my teeth. Waiting wasn't an option. This wasn't about patience. This was about ending it. I slid out of the car, keeping my footsteps light as I made my way toward the entrance of the inn. My heart pounded, but my hands were steady. I wasn't scared of Daniel anymore. I walked inside, and there he was, sitting at a corner table, a half-empty drink in front of him, looking more worn down than I had ever seen him. His hair was disheveled, his face thinner, his suit replaced with an old sweater and jeans. But the cold calculation in his eyes hadn't changed. He looked up and smiled. "Evelyn," he said smoothly, as if we were two old friends meeting by coincidence. "I was wondering when you'd show up." I pulled out the chair across from him, never breaking eye contact. "This ends today," I said. His smirk deepened. "Oh, darling, it hasn't even begun." The conversation started as a game. Daniel loved to talk, to manipulate, to twist reality into something that suited him. But this time I didn't give him the satisfaction. "You lost," I said simply. "The company, your money, your reputation." His fingers tapped against his glass, his smirk still in place. "You think that matters to me anymore?" I leaned forward. "You have nothing left." He chuckled. "That's where you're wrong." I frowned. "What do you mean?" Daniel exhaled dramatically. "Did you really think I just sat in prison wallowing in regret? No, sweetheart. I was planning." A cold chill ran down my spine. "Planning what?" He tilted his head. "You think you won because you took everything away from me?" His voice lowered. "I spent my entire life building something out of nothing. You had everything handed to you." I stiffened. "That's a lie." "Is it?" he mused. "Who was the one by Grace's side every night? Who was the one making sacrifices?" He smirked. "Oh, right. Me." Rage burned through me. "You abandoned her." His expression darkened. "I did what I had to do." I clenched my fists. "You left her. You chose Lily over your own daughter." Daniel leaned back. "And yet, here you are, sitting across from me. Meaning, despite everything, you're still tied to me." I refused to react. He was baiting me, trying to make me feel something for him again. But I was past that. "Do you want to know why I called you here?" he continued, his voice softer now. I remained silent. His smirk faded. "Because I want you to know something before it's too late." I narrowed my eyes. "Too late for what?" Daniel exhaled. "For you to realize that I wasn't the only one keeping secrets." I froze. Something in his tone shifted. He wasn't playing anymore. "You think I was the villain, Evelyn. That I was the worst thing to happen to you." He leaned in, his voice lower now. "But you never stopped to wonder who else was lying to you." I swallowed hard. "What are you talking about?" Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out a small flash drive. He placed it on the table between us. "Everything you think you know?" He smiled darkly. "It's not the full story." My hands curled into fists. I hated him, hated how he still had power over me. But I couldn't ignore the feeling twisting in my gut. The feeling that maybe, just maybe, he was telling the truth. I grabbed the flash drive, shoving it into my pocket. Daniel watched me carefully, then lifted his drink. "To new beginnings," he said mockingly. I stood abruptly. "This is the last time you'll ever see me," I said, my voice cold. His eyes flickered with something unreadable. "Are you sure about that?" I didn't answer. I turned and walked out, my heart pounding, because I had just gotten exactly what I wanted. But for the first time in this fight, I wasn't sure if I was ready to see the truth. And something told me that whatever was on that flash drive would change everything. Back in my apartment, I sat at my desk, staring at the small black flash drive in my palm. It felt heavier than it should have, like it carried more than just data. Carried secrets. Daniel's words echoed in my head. "Everything you think you know is not the full story." For years, I had believed I knew everything. The betrayals, the lies, the theft. It had all been laid bare. But what if I was wrong? What if Daniel, the man I had despised for so long, wasn't the only one who had deceived me? The thought sent a cold shiver down my spine. I plugged the flash drive into my laptop. A single folder appeared. "Read me first." I clicked it open. A video file. My breath caught in my throat as I hit play. The screen flickered, and then a familiar face appeared. But it wasn't Daniel. It was Lily, the woman who had stolen my husband. the woman who had watched as my family fell apart. She looked different, older, thinner, and terrified. She was sitting in a dimly lit room, her hands clasped tightly together. And then she spoke. "Evelyn, if you're watching this, it means Daniel gave you the flash drive. And that means you're in danger." I stiffened. "You think you know what happened, but you don't. I wasn't just his mistress. I was a pawn. Just like you." A lump formed in my throat. "A pawn?" Lily's voice trembled as she continued. "Daniel isn't who you think he is. He never was. Everything, the money, the fraud, the affairs, was just the surface. But underneath, he was hiding something much bigger." I gripped the desk. "He made me think I was special, that I was different from you. But the truth is, I was just another tool, another means to an end. And by the time I realized what he was really doing, it was too late." The screen flickered. The video glitched, as if someone had tried to corrupt it. And then Lily's voice dropped to a whisper. "Evelyn, I need you to run." A chill raced down my spine. "You're not safe. You never were. And if you're watching this, it means Daniel is already planning his next move." The screen went black. The video ended. I sat frozen, my mind racing. Lily was scared. Not of me, of Daniel. What had she meant by his next move? What was she trying to warn me about? And more importantly, where was she now? I opened the next file on the flash drive. It wasn't a video. It was a list of names. People I didn't recognize. But as I scrolled, my breath caught in my throat. One name stood out. Grace Whitmore. My daughter's name. I clicked it, my fingers trembling. A scanned document popped up, a hospital file. Her hospital file. But something was wrong. The date on the file was 2 weeks after she died. My stomach twisted. How could there be medical records for Grace after she was gone? I scrolled further, my heart pounding. At the bottom of the document, there was a signature. Dr. Alan Prescott. I knew that name. He had been Grace's lead physician. The man who had held my hand the night she passed away. The man who had looked me in the eye and told me there was nothing more we could do. Had he lied? Had Daniel known something about Grace's death that I didn't? I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my keys and drove straight to the hospital. The receptionist looked up when I stormed in. "I need to see Dr. Prescott," I said, barely keeping my voice steady. Her face fell. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "Dr. Prescott passed away last year." I staggered back. "What?" "He had a heart attack in his home," she said. "It was sudden, too convenient." The man who had handled Grace's case, the one who might have known something I didn't, was gone. I gritted my teeth. Someone didn't want me finding out the truth. That night, I sat in my car outside my apartment, staring at my phone. I had one last option. One person who might know what Daniel had been hiding. I dialed the number. The line rang. And then, a voice I never thought I'd hear again. "Evelyn." I swallowed hard. "Lily." A shaky breath on the other end. "You got the flash drive?" "Yes." Another pause. Then, "I didn't tell you everything in the video," she whispered. My grip on the phone tightened. "Tell me now." A long silence. And then 6 words that changed everything. "Grace's death wasn't what you think." The world tilted. "What?" I choked out. "I can't explain over the phone," she said quickly. "Meet me. Tomorrow. 9 p.m. The old train station." Before I could respond, the line went dead. I stared at my phone, my pulse thundering. What did she mean? What had really happened to Grace? And why did I feel like I was about to uncover something far worse than betrayal? The next night, I arrived at the train station. It was abandoned, long forgotten. The perfect place for a secret meeting. I parked my car and stepped out, scanning the area. No sign of Lily, only the hum of distant streetlights, the faint whistle of wind through broken windows. I waited. Minutes ticked by. Then a shadow moved. Footsteps echoed across the platform. I turned and saw her, Lily. She looked exhausted. Her once perfect hair tangled. Her eyes darting around as if she expected someone to grab her at any moment. "Evelyn," she whispered. I took a step closer. Tell me. Her lips parted, but she never got the chance. A gunshot rang out. Lily's eyes went wide. She gasped. And then she collapsed. Blood pooled beneath her, staining the cold concrete. I screamed, dropping to my knees beside her. Lily! She coughed, blood trickling from the corner of her mouth. Her shaking fingers gripped my wrist. And with her last breath, she whispered one final secret. It was never about you. It was about Grace. Her hand went limp. Her eyes stared into nothing. Lily was gone. And as I sat there, my hands soaked in her blood, I realized I had never known the truth at all. But now, I was going to find it, even if it killed me. Lily's body lay lifeless on the cold concrete, her blood pooling around us. The train station was silent except for the erratic pounding of my own heartbeat. My hands trembled as I pressed them against her wound, as if I could still save her. But she was gone, and someone had just killed her to keep her silent. I forced myself to breathe, my mind racing. Whoever pulled the trigger was still out there, watching, waiting. I forced myself to move, to scramble behind an old pillar, my hands shaking as I reached for my phone. I dialed Eleanor. She picked up immediately. Evelyn? What's wrong? I pressed my back against the pillar, my breath unsteady. Lily's dead. A sharp inhale. What? Someone shot her. Right in front of me. My voice wavered, but I kept going. She knew something, Eleanor, about Grace. And now she's dead. A long silence. Then, Eleanor's voice dropped. Get out of there. Now. I didn't wait to be told twice. I kept low, scanning the shadows. The gunman could still be nearby. The hair on the back of my neck prickled with the weight of someone watching. I sprinted toward my car, fumbling with my keys. My fingers were still slick with Lily's blood. I slid into the driver's seat and locked the doors, my breaths coming in ragged gasps. My eyes darted to the rearview mirror. A shadow moved in the distance. Someone was there. I didn't wait to find out who. I slammed my foot on the gas and sped out of the station, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. Lily was dead, and I was next. I drove straight to Eleanor's office, my mind racing. Lily had said Grace's death wasn't what I thought. What did that mean? Had she been murdered? No, that was impossible. Wasn't it? Eleanor pulled me inside the office and locked the door. Her sharp eyes scanned me. Tell me everything. I told her. About the flash drive, the hospital records, the wrong date, about Lily's warning, and then about the gunshot. Eleanor cursed under her breath. This wasn't random, Evelyn. Someone doesn't want you asking questions. I exhaled shakily. Then we need to find answers. Eleanor didn't hesitate. There's only one person left who might know. I nodded. Daniel. We found him at a private bar in the city, sitting in a dark booth, a whiskey glass in hand. The moment he saw me, he smirked. He knew I would come. I sat across from him, my jaw clenched. He looked amused. Evelyn, he drawled. You look like you've seen a ghost. I ignored the jab. Lily's dead. His smirk faded slightly. Yes, I heard. Something inside me snapped. You knew? Didn't you? I hissed. You knew she was a target. Daniel tilted his head. Why do you think I gave you the flash drive? I inhaled sharply. She said it was never about me. It was about Grace. For the first time, his expression darkened. A long pause. Then, in a voice colder than ice, he whispered, You were never supposed to find out. Daniel took a slow sip of whiskey, his fingers tapping against the glass. Then he leaned forward. You think I was the villain, he said softly. But I wasn't the one who failed Grace. I froze. What are you talking about? He exhaled. It wasn't an accident that the hospital files were dated 2 weeks after her death. My stomach twisted. What do you mean? He stared at me for a long moment. Then, they kept her alive. I blinked. What? His voice was calm. Too calm. After you said goodbye, after you left the hospital, Grace didn't die that night. The world tilted. That's not true. My voice trembled. I saw her. I. Daniel shook his head. They told you she was gone because they needed you to believe it. They didn't want you asking questions. Couldn't breathe. What? My voice cracked. What are you saying? Daniel's gaze was unreadable. I'm saying someone took her, Evelyn. The room spun. I felt like I was falling. No, this wasn't possible. Grace was gone. Wasn't she? Eleanor and I spent the next 2 days digging, searching records, contacting old hospital staff, trying to prove Daniel wrong. But the deeper we looked, the worse it got. The hospital had covered something up. Buried records, erased files. And then, we found it. An anonymous medical report from the same night Grace supposedly died. But it didn't say time of death. It said transferred. It covered my mouth, nausea rising. Eleanor clenched her fists. They moved her. Tears blurred my vision. My baby girl hadn't been buried. She had been taken. But by who? And why? The answer came in an email. A name we hadn't seen before. Dr. Victor Langley. He wasn't a pediatric doctor. He wasn't even a hospital administrator. He was a medical researcher. A man specializing in experimental treatments on terminal patients. Eleanor read the file out loud. He was running an off-the-books program. No legal approval. No oversight. I clutched the chair. And Grace? Eleanor turned the page. There it was. Subject 17, Grace Whitmore. My body went numb. She wasn't a patient, Eleanor whispered. She was an experiment. The room fell silent. A cold realization crept in. Grace hadn't died. She had been taken. And now, I had to find her. No matter what it took. I wasn't breathing. Not really. The words on the page in front of me blurred together. Subject 17, Grace Whitmore. The truth was sitting right there, hidden in plain sight. Grace hadn't died that night. She had been taken. For what? Some medical experiment? Some illegal, off-the-books program? I forced myself to move, to breathe, to think. We need to find him, I said, my voice cold. Eleanor was already dialing. Dr. Victor Langley disappeared 3 years ago, she muttered. After a string of lawsuits. I clenched my fists. Someone knows where he is. Because if Langley had taken my daughter, I would tear the world apart to bring her back. We worked through the night. Every name, every connection, every lead that could get us closer to Langley. And then, a breakthrough. Eleanor looked up from her laptop, her eyes dark with something close to rage. I found him. I barely swallowed my gasp. Where? She turned the screen to face me. An isolated medical facility. Private. High security. Hidden under a shell corporation. It wasn't a hospital. It was a lab. And Grace. Grace could be inside. I grabbed my coat. Eleanor caught my arm. Evelyn, wait. We need a plan. I shook my head. No more waiting. If my daughter was alive, I wasn't leaving without her. The facility was buried deep in the mountains, surrounded by thick trees and an electric fence. It didn't look like a hospital. It looked like a prison. Eleanor had secured a contact, a former technician who had worked inside. He met us in a diner miles from the lab, looking over his shoulder like he expected someone to follow him. They moved patients in and out at night, he whispered. No names, just numbers. My stomach twisted. 17. He hesitated, then nodded. She was the youngest. My breath hitched. What happened to her? He swallowed. I don't know. I grabbed his wrist, my nails digging into his skin. I need to get inside. He looked terrified. You don't understand, he hissed. If you go in there, you might not come out. I let go of him. I don't care. That night we made our move. Eleanor had secured stolen credentials. A guard's uniform, away inside. The facility was heavily secured, but I barely felt fear. Because somewhere behind these walls, my daughter had been taken. And I would find her. The deeper we moved into the building, the colder it became. Fluorescent lights hummed. The air smelled sterile, too clean. And then, we found it. A locked room. The files inside were stacked in neat rows, labeled with numbers. I ripped through them until I found her. Number 17. I yanked the folder open, my hands shaking. Photos, medical charts, notes. My pulse pounded in my ears as I read the first line. Subject 17 was stabilized after transfer. Stabilized. Not dead. Stabilized. I turned the page. There was a photo. A recent one. I gasped. Her hair was shorter. Her face slightly older. But her eyes were the same. I choked on a sob. Grace. Eleanor grabbed my arm. Evelyn, she whispered. I hear something. Footsteps. Guards. We didn't have time. I stuffed the folder into my jacket and ran. We reached another hallway, lined with doors. And then, I saw it. The last door on the right. Subject 17. My heart slammed against my ribs. I reached for the handle. It was locked. Step back, Eleanor whispered. She aimed her stolen gun at the lock. Bang. The door burst open. And inside was my daughter. Grace sat on a hospital bed hooked up to machines. She flinched at the noise, her wide eyes staring at me in shock. For a moment, I couldn't move. I had dreamed of this moment for years. I had cried in hospital rooms, believing she was gone. But she wasn't. She was here. I stepped forward, tears blurring my vision. Grace. Her lips trembled. Mommy? I collapsed beside her, sobbing as I pulled her into my arms. She was real, warm, alive. She clung to me, shaking. I thought you left me, she whispered. I kissed the top of her head, tears falling into her hair. I never left you, I choked out. I never stopped looking. She buried her face in my shoulder. And for the first time since she was taken, she was home. We didn't have time to cry. Alarms blared. Guards were coming. Eleanor shoved a gun into my hand. Time to go. I scooped Grace into my arms, holding her close as we ran. Shots rang out behind us. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. Because nothing was going to take my daughter from me again. We made it out. Barely. Eleanor had called in backup, a journalist who had been investigating Langley for years. Within days, the story broke worldwide. Langley was arrested. His facility was shut down. And the world learned the truth. Grace had been stolen for medical experiments. And I had brought her home. 1 month later, I sat with Grace at the park. She was still adjusting, still processing. But she was smiling. She ran ahead, her laughter floating in the air. I watched her, my heart full. Daniel was gone. Langley was exposed. And Grace was free. She turned back toward me, beaming. Mommy, I smiled through my tears. Yes, baby? She ran into my arms and whispered the words I had waited years to hear. I love you. I held her close. And for the first time, the nightmare was over. The past was gone. And the future was ours.